Hi little Beppies or whoever you are, and welcome back to a bit of a different video this time. In the past few months, more precisely ever since the 6th of May 2025, something has been starting to creep up on me. And the more research I did, the more things I found out, and the more things that happened, this something has gotten stronger. More precisely, my dislike for the current German Inner Secretary, Alexander Dobrindt. Now I mentioned that this has been creeping up on me ever since the 6th of May 2025, which was when Friedrich Merz was voted to be the 10th Chancellor, after failing once, which is both hilarious and also dystopian to me at the same time. With him, the Black-Red coalition shaped out of CDU-CSU, aka the Union, and SPD, which I also love to call Black-Rot coalition in reference to Merz's old job at BlackRock, started governing for the 23rd legislative period of the Federal Republic of Germany. And this is where the topic of the video comes into play. The Secretary Cabinet of Merz replaced the previous Secretary Cabinet of Scholz, even though the Secretary Cabinet of Scholz was not so complete anymore. And Alexander Dobrindt replaced Nancy Faeser as the Inner Secretary. And oh boy, I was not prepared for that. So first off, who even is Alexander Dobrindt? Well, he's the main topic of the video, so let's go over this quickly. Born Peißenberg, Bavaria, on the 7th June of 1970, joined the CSU faction in 1990, is a member of the Bundestag since 2002 and faction chairman of the CSU since 2017. From 2013 to 2017, he was traffic secretary, and since May 2025, he's the inner secretary of the Federal Republic of Germany. Having gone over that, let's continue. Now, funnily enough, my first impression of Dobrindt was actually rather positive, seeing as his first action as inner secretary was to immediately ban the anti-Semitic right-wing extremist Reichsbürger group Königreich Deutschland, which literally translates to Kingdom of Germany. So I thought, great, this man fights far right-wingers who are against our constitution. Unless, of course, they are viable options for a next coalition to threaten the SPD. Dobrindt says he wants to quote-unquote govern the AfD away rather than ban them. And this reminds me an awful lot of Franz von Papen, a conservative politician of the Weimar Republic who, after the Moustache Man was voted to be Chancellor, said, "In 2 months we will have pushed Hitler into the corner so tight that he squeaks." And you probably know how that turned out. Nonetheless, this is something most union politicians say right now and opens up the entire new debate of an AfD ban. What is more interesting, however, is if we compare this to the Alexander Dobrindt from 2011, because he actually wanted to ban Germany's Democratic Socialist Party, Die Linke, which means the left. Which, to be fair, was a somewhat sensible idea at that time, seeing as the faction's chairwoman at the time wanted to, quote-unquote, find a path to communism. She is no longer the chairwoman, and that was only one statement, though. This role is now filled by Ines Schwerter and Jan van Aken. What is much more interesting about this topic is that the party ban suggestion of the left party was based on one take by the party's chairwoman, and the party hardly had any influence, not posing a threat whatsoever. Now what makes this relevant is that the AfD is actively monitored by the Verfassungsschutz, and there's a 1,000 pages long document about over 500 right-wing extremist, some may even say fascist statements by even high-level politicians of the party, such as Alice Weidel, Tino Kruppalla, and Björn Höcke, who, despite being legally able to be called a fascist, still leads Thuringia's AfD. And other than the left party in 2011, the AfD of 2025 very much does have influence, and very much is a threat to our democracy, even surpassing the Union in some polls, making them the most favored option among German citizens. And that threat he just wants to govern away? This is both extremely hypocritical and alarming. But that, to be fair, is just one thing, and everyone makes mistakes. However, this is only the first of many, because in 2013, Dobrindt was made secretary for the first time, back then as the traffic secretary. Let's just say it this way, he didn't do well. Like, at all. First off, there was a foreigner toll. The foreigner toll that will be picked up by Andreas Scheuer later on. I cannot comprehend for what logical reason Dobrindt might have decided to put up this foreign toll. To explain how it worked. Everybody crossing through Germany had to pay a toll, much like it is the case in France right now, just with one major difference. You see, the toll in France actually serves a purpose. It gives money to the state. Dobrindt's toll would not have. Matter of fact, it would have done the opposite. Because while everybody would have had to pay for the toll, Germans would have gotten their money back, which ended up not being worth the costs at all. In fact, it would have done the opposite. It would have been very much devastating. And there's proof for that. Seeing as it would have broken the EU law too, the European Commission stopped the introduction of such a toll, but the preparations still were at least 243 million euros. I will not even mention Scheuer, who followed Dobrindt as traffic secretary here. This guy pushed through it all, and now he's getting sued. I will have not get into details about that. Oh, also, he calls people who sue for refugee rights anti-deportation industry.
Anti-Abschiebeindustrie.
Absolutely insane. Yay. Dobrindt, however, does not get sued, because, as I mentioned beforehand, he is Inner Secretary now. Aside from that, there is also accusations of him supporting the car lobby, ignoring their manipulations and bringing up their talking points, but I will not take that as a fact, just an assumption. It gets bad enough anyway. He also messed up the Breitbandausbau, which had the purpose of improving the digitalization of Germany and Wi-Fi in rural areas. But due to Dobrindt not being able to manage anything and missing the target of sustaining every household with at least 50 Mbits per second, it failed. So, quite logically, if someone messed up like that as a secretary, you wouldn't make them a faction chairman or secretary again, right? Right? Right, because the CDU-CSU faction tends to reflect on their mistakes and does never make mistakes twice. Sarcasm aside, now this guy is both CSU faction chairman and inner secretary. I mean, the CDU always does this, putting candidates back up who failed, but still. Typical union style. Every other faction does it differently. The Linksjugend Solid, which is the youth faction of the left party, straight up banned someone for an anti-Semitic post. Rightfully so. The SPD didn't put up a single secretary from a traffic light coalition again, except Pistorius, although I wish they had at least put up Nancy Faeser again, so I wouldn't have to make this video right now. Because brace yourself, the worst is yet to come, and it will come last. As the inner secretary, Dobrindt decided to violate EU law to make border controls inside the EU. Now you might say, well actually no, that is legal according to EU law, I just googled it. And you would be correct, but I would also be correct. Because at the time of introducing the border controls, it did violate EU laws to close borders until a few weeks ago when all inner secretaries met in Copenhagen and changed the law, including Dobrindt. Now border controls and deportation are BS in themselves if you ask me, and I might make a video on that topic at some point too. For now, I recommend checking out the Heute Show videos on the topic, if you speak German that is, otherwise just turn on subtitles. The point is, this guy at least planned to violate EU law twice. That feels like an achievement to be honest, seeing as he was only secretary twice. The deportation stuff also makes zero sense, both financially as pointless and morally questionable. Either it is purely driven by ideology on his side, or right-wing agitation from the AfD pushing the union to the right. Or both. Although his faction, the CSU, has also always been very right-wing. Just saying Seehofer, who has always been sympathizing with certain far right-wing individuals. But you know, EU law violation twice is obviously not enough. The union faction suggested rolling out the surveillance system Palantir on a federal basis. In Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia and Hessen it gets used already. And let's say it's rather questionable. Not only does it heavily rely on AI, it also tracks every single social media action, including mine right now. This system would allow an anti-democratic party to absolutely wreak havoc if brought in power. And given that we have a potentially anti-democratic party leading the polls right now, that is a rather unintelligent idea. Dobrindt, however, says he is not concerned at all whatsoever. Yeah. And what one should also consider is that mass surveillance is unconstitutional in Germany, and the owner of Palantir, Peter Thiel, said, "I do not believe democracy and freedom are compatible any longer," and that Dobrindt supports. Seems a little suspicious if you ask me. Now, as I said before, Alexander Dobrindt is the faction chairman of the CSU. And as a faction chairman, you are somewhat responsible for what your faction does. So if you do not know, Merz has stopped the exportation of weapons to Israel partially. And you might guess what faction criticizes him the most for it. Not the opposition, no. Yeah, the CSU. The faction of which this guy is chairman of. And as if not controlling your faction wasn't bad enough, he actually had a statement about the stop. Now mind you that while the war in big quotation marks here, was led by the Hamas, it is not a relation. As you can see in this statistic, there are 50 times as many Palestinian deaths compared to Israel. Netanyahu and the IDF are killing tens of thousands of people. Civilians, children. They kill with hunger and rockets. This is no longer war, this is a genocide. And yet he decides to react to Merz like this. Quote, "Lately, many seem to forget that the Hamas is the cause for this war. Israel recognizes its right to defend itself. We are fully behind that." Quote end. Yeah, as if all of this hadn't been bad enough yet, this man also apparently supports a genocide. But for a German politician in particular, this is going to get even worse. First of all, let's do some law deep dive. In 2024, the Selbstbestimmungsgesetz, self-determination law, was passed by the former traffic light coalition consisting of Social Democrats, Greens and Liberals. The Union was not in it. This law allows for transgender and non-binary people to legally change their gender and name by simply going to the next best civil registry office and pay 40 to 60 euros depending on the region. Seeing as I am neither transgender nor non-binary, I have never done it myself, but this is what I know about it. Now the Union was against the law being passed, which I think is nonsense in itself, but you know, they are a right-wing faction. They have to hate on
wokeness und cancel culture.
Now I think abolishing said law is BS, because it makes life for many genderqueer individuals much easier and has very little flaws. But this is bad enough on its own. And what does Dobrindt do? Just plan to abolish it at some point? Nah, after all, that would not be right-wing enough. And as much as I love making fun of the Union, it actually gets much, much worse. Alexander Dobrindt is the first German politician ever to demand a register of minority for them being a minority. Yeah, everybody who used the self-determination law, he wants to put on an extra list and put their dead name on their ID card. Never before was this thing in Germany. Wait, that isn't correct. Let me revise that. Never before was this a thing in the Federal Republic of Germany. But it has happened on German ground before. In 1935, the Nuremberg race laws were passed, forcing Jewish people to have a name marking them as Jewish on their ID. Now, Dobrindt forces trans people to have their dead name on their ID, making them identifiable as trans easily. At least, that is all so far, but it's heading into a scary direction. Of course, Dobrindt had an excuse for that too. Because this could be used to evade taxes by changing your name and then being unidentifiable, therefore this was absolutely needed. However, everyone in Germany has a tax identification number, which can be used to trace what taxes have been paid yet or not. This tax number, of course, does not change when changing the legal name. Now, if Dobrindt actually cared about tax evasion, he would have found out pretty quickly that the number does not change. You have it from birth and you stick with it. So either he doesn't know about the number because the only reason he demands this was to find a way to hurt trans people and doesn't actually care about tax evasion. Or he does know about the number, but purposefully forgot that because the only reason he demands this is to hurt trans people. No matter how you put it, this can only have had the purpose of harming transgender individuals. This is only reinforced by him also using the recent case of Sven Liebig, a neo-Nazi who abused the law in order to get into women's jail, fled anyway and cannot be found any longer. And no, this person is not actually trans. If they were, they would not have a beard anymore due to it causing them dysphoria. End of discussion. And he immediately hung up on that and said, "This cannot be possible here. We have to roll out the register right now." But how would his register even fix this? That's right, it wouldn't. So this is absolute nonsense. So not only is the minority register, this is also a minority register with the sole purpose of doing harm. That is genuinely insane if you think about it, at least for Germany's standards. However, there is a petition going around to block this register, and if you live in Germany, please sign it. I will put it in my comments since I cannot put links into my description. Now, if you put all of this together, you will realize that this man hates certain minorities, relativizes right-wing extremist parties and sympathizes with right-wing extremist governments, openly offers support for genocide, does not care about laws, including the German constitution, is corrupt, suggests fascist policies like the minority register, suggests mass surveillance systems by an anti-democrat, and suggested banning a democratic party, proper democratic party, not fascists playing victim, due to a single statement. This sounds... well, I will let you shape your own conclusion, especially since I do not want to get sued. This man has to leave politics or be forced out of it. Dear Verfassungsschutz, if you see this, keep an eye out on him. How ironic, that is literally what he said about the Left Party in 2021. If you enjoyed this time with a different video, subscribe, like, and feel free to leave a comment. Also, please don't forget, I will still make the idle content in the future, so don't unsubscribe now if you're not interested in German politics. See ya!